Hello, I'm chess expert Gil Luna. This lesson is on Rook versus Knight Endgame. All right, so in general, Rook versus Knight Endgame, like versus Rook versus Bishop Endgames, are drawn. All right, there are some exceptions though. There are a few things you have to know if you're the one defending this position. First, in general, you do not want to separate the knight from the king. If the knight goes too far from the king, it would normally get trapped. And there'll be some type of finesse move where it'll be lost, there'll be a mate threat. We're going to go over one of those examples right now. Next, you want to stay out of the corners because even if you don't separate the king and the knight, if they move to one of the corners, the game is normally lost. All right, so you want to keep the knight close to the king, and you can stay somewhere on the edge, just not on the corner, and definitely in the middle. You will not lose. All right, so let's take this first example. All right, so here we're in the center of we're on the edge of the board, but we're in the middle. So here in general, it's safe, this position. So the first move is pretty much forced. All right, you want to go knight here. All right, and check. All right, so that's pretty much forced, and the king is going to go over. So here you can just go back, check, and then the king will go over again. And here it's safe to leave the king and bother the rook a little bit. That's fine because this king is over here, and you can always just go right back to the d1 square. Now, let me show you how dangerous it is to leave the king. All right, so what I'm going to do on this move is after rook c2, I set up this position where this variation where I move away with the knight. All right, so the knight has moved away from the king. You say, it looks generally safe, right? Watch what happens. So now, as soon as this rook comes up to c4, these squares are no longer accessible to the knight. So what happens is black has pushed the knight back even farther. All right, so now the knight is even farther away from the king. Okay. So rook here, and we're going to bother this knight, and then knight has to go even farther away from the king. Now you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, why can't I just go knight d5 and find a way to get closer to the king? Well, here's the situation. After this check, now we have a problem. You see how dangerous it is to move the knight away from the king? It doesn't look like anything too serious right away, but now look. After this check, the king moves over, and then the rook is going to play here and threaten the knight and checkmate. That's simple. And if the king goes here directly, check, thank you for the knight. So that's why in this position, you might be saying, hey, why do I have to go all the way back to c8? Well, because you have this problem right here with the king in the back row and the knight being attacked and there being mate threats. So the knight goes back to c8, and now what the rook does is rook here. So once again, we're restricting this knight. All right, this knight cannot go here, here, or here. Now the knight cannot go to those squares. If the knight comes here, we have the same issue that we just looked at before. All right, we're going to go, if the knight comes here, we have check. Then if the king moves anywhere on the d file, then we have rook over, and the knight is pinned and lost. And if the king moves to f1, we have the same trick as before. Rook over, knight has to move somewhere, and checkmate. So this is why it's dangerous to go away from the king. So here, same thing. Let's say the knight doesn't move, the king comes out. This king is going to start going towards this knight to trap it, and the knight can't come out because of this little trick. All right, so let's go back. This is just one example of why that knight should not go away from the king. All right, so we go here, knight back to d1, And rook check looks a little scary, but it's not. Just move your king over. Rook over, threatening checkmate right here. Right, we have a mate threat right here, but the king can just go back over, and there's no way for black to make progress in this position. Rook over, king over, and if he tries pinning the knight, the king will just go back over. Okay, king will just go back over, and you can't do this because the knight covers that square. So you can't threaten a mate or a zugzwang position where the king has to move and then take the knight. So this position, as you can see, is a draw and very defendable for white. Now we're going to look at some examples of why it's so bad to have the king and the knight in the corner. All right, so let's look at this position. The king and the knight are in the corner. So we have the same setup, king next to the knight, but now they're in the corner. Well, this is a very easy win for black. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can figure out what you would do in this position for black. Okay, so in this position, all it takes is a little rook finesse. All right, all you have to do is waste a tempo and make it white's turn. So this little rook move, and that's it. Now, the king can't move, so the knight has to be sacrificed. And wherever the knight goes, the game is over. All right, so it took that one little finesse move, and the game's over. Let's go to the next example. So here we switch the king and the knight. All right, in the last position, the king was in the corner and the knight was on g1. Here we switch them. So same thing. Pause the video and see if you can figure out what you would do. All right, so same answer basically. All you're looking for is a finesse move. So this king is in check right now by this knight. All right, so all you have to do is move over and the knight is out of squares. And if the king decides to move, then mate. So once again, this in the corner does not work. All right, so next problem. Sorry about that. All right, that was the last one for that sequence. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this video.